This week, Matt Alderman joins us filling in for John Strand. Matt and I are going to discuss threat and vulnerability management because we happen to work for a vulnerability management company before, as many of our listeners probably already know at this point. And we may even touch on cloud and application security's impact on vendors, which can help them with integration into the enterprise. In the enterprise news, BombGuard is being renamed to Beyond Trust after, well, I believe they did 3 acquisitions this year, which will probably come up in that conversation. Attivo makes some announcements in the security deception space to support containers and serverless technology, catching them up in the market. Symantec extends data loss prevention with a DRM platform. ExtraHop announces availability of RevealX for Azure. As Microsoft Ignite is happening this week, we will have some announcements on the Microsoft Azure side especially. Cloud-native applications are at risk from zero-touch attacks, so stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly.
I'm a tiger. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. I don't know how this is going to go because Paul's not here this week, but we're just going to give it a shot.
Even if you've got experience in security, you can benefit from going to somewhere and learning about that bug again. Wearing my tactical turtleneck just for Mr. John Strand, who is on the lines via Skype. John, welcome to the program.
I'm wearing the tactical fleece as well, Paul. This is
Excellent.
A fully, completely, and utterly tactical show.
Are you an enterprise dissatisfied with overpriced analytics software that can't keep up with modern data? If so, then GravWell is the solution for you. GravWell is an unstructured data analytics platform for enterprises who demand total data visibility across their network. GravWell lets your security team go beyond the SIM and fuse data sources to correlate and answer questions you didn't know needed to be asked. Go to gravwell.io/Security Weekly for an unlimited data trial and gain uncompromising visibility today. Improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your security operations with DF Labs security orchestration, automation, and response technology. Automate threat containment, orchestrate incident response, and measure operational performance with DF Labs IncMan SOAR platform. Leverage your current security resources to minimize incident resolution time, maximize analyst efficiency, increase the number of incidents handled, and reduce overall risk. IncMan SOAR acts as a force multiplier, enabling your security team to do more with less. Streamline the full incident response lifecycle automation process today. Keep your cybersecurity incidents under control with DF Labs. Visit dflabs.com/Security Weekly and request to see IncMan SOAR live in action. Effectively securing your organization and its reputation requires a smarter approach. To maximize efficiency and minimize risk, security experts turn to LogRhythm, the only leading solution built solely for security teams by a security team committed to your success. With next-gen SIM, user and entity behavior analytics, network traffic and behavior analysis, security automation and orchestration, and compliance, LogRhythm provides security made smarter. Stop attackers from domain credential theft and lateral movement with a 99% success rate by using artificial intelligence to control the attacker's perception of the environment. Javelin Networks is the world's first endpoint intrusion containment platform to protect domain networks. Javelin detects targeted attacks and breaches by obfuscating Active Directory, domain controllers, domain identities, domain credentials, and all domain resources. It only takes one compromised machine to jeopardize the entire organization. Don't be a victim. Visit javelin-networks.com and request a demo of AD Protect today. Are you worried about PCI compliance? Does your development team understand or care about security? Are you ready to face a breach of your customer sensitive data? See the worst that can happen before it does. Black Hills Information Security can help you help management see the future. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a web application penetration test can mitigate the risk before you go live. Welcome, everyone, to episode 108 of Enterprise Security Weekly. This is, in fact, September 26th, 2018. I am still your host, Paul Asadorian, joined on the lines via Zoom by Mr. Matt Alderman. Matt, welcome to the program today.
Thank you. It's cool enough in Colorado. I have my tactical fleece on today.
There you go. There you go. And you're like out there in the mountains, dude, in Colorado, huh? I don't think I ever realized how far out you actually lived.
Yeah, I live at about just under 6,900 feet in elevation, and I think this will be one of the first Septembers we haven't seen snow. So I think we're gonna escape this month without snow.
Does that explain why you seem like you're in shape all the time because you're used to a higher altitude? That affects you, right?
That and a 2-mile walk every morning with the wife.
There you go.
We try to get out every morning and walk through the development and get our walk in. So it kind of keeps us in shape a little bit. Yeah.
Nice. So let's see. John Strand's not here this week. We've got lots of fun stuff to talk about. I want to first announce that we are doing a webcast with Logarithm. Thank you to everyone who's registered so far. This is obviously a topic that has very much resonated with our audience. It's based on a talk I gave earlier this year at InfoSec World. Did I give it at InfoSec World? I don't know. I gave it somewhere this year or last year. And I only gave it once at a particular conference, which I thought was at InfoSec World. Maybe not. Anyway, I think it was. Okay, yeah, you're right, because I'm getting confused with Source Boston. So it was InfoSec World. And so, I don't know, maybe there was somewhere in the range of 50 to 100 people. So I'm like, hey, we should do this as a webcast. And lots of people have registered for it. It's called Tips and Tricks for Defending the Enterprise Using Open Source Tools. It's a very, very fun talk and a very informative talk. And I'm happy to present it alongside Logarithm, one of our awesome sponsors, securityweekly.com/Logarithm. You can go ahead and register for that. All righty. So, Matt, now where do we want to begin? We want to begin talking about one of our, I think, favorite topics. Well, certainly an area that we spent a lot of time working on together, and that is threat and vulnerability management. And I think you and I have really covered and talked about how organizations, I think one of the primary challenges today that enterprises face, at least that I hear, is collecting and prioritizing and remediating, actually performing some action based on the results of some type of vulnerability scanner, or you could even extend that into threats as well, which vulnerability is potentially a threat, right? And doing that in the organization is still something that's very challenging today, Matt.
Yeah, we've known for years that data collection, the collection and identification of the vulnerability was only part of the equation. We needed a way to figure out, okay, I've got thousands of vulnerabilities, which ones are the most important? And so what you started to see evolve over the years was this concept now named threat and vulnerability management. I think the original kind of vendor in the space was Risk.io, which is now Kenna Security, but others have kind of joined along to say, hey, can I take scanner data from Qualys, Tenable, Rapid7, put some analytics on top of that with things like known threats and exploits and asset criticality, and give you a better idea of what are the most critical vulnerabilities that I should think about first? Because we all know we have limited resources, limited time in the day. How do I go attack the things that are going to create the greatest amount of risk or reduce the greatest amount of risk in my environment? And that's kind of how the environment's evolved. So there's a number of them out there now that we'll probably hit on here in a minute. But that sits on a layer on top of kind of what we used to do at Tenable. Now, some of the VM vendors have also tried to do aspects of this. Qualys had a product called Threat Protect. Tenable wants to move into the space. Rapid7's approached it a little differently with their move into incident detection response and the news today on Insight Connect, which we'll cover in the news segment, which is their command acquisition doing orchestration automation. So you see each of the VM players addressing this a little differently, but then you got this whole new layer of threat and vulnerability management guys on top, also trying to put some smarts on that data.
Now, I want to analyze this category a little bit. I'm familiar with Kenna. I also want to say I think that their name and brand recognition has finally caught up. I think it took this many years for them to accomplish that. However, what I like about their name change, Matt, is it differentiates them from all the other vendors that have risk in the name. And I know you might have worked with Kenna. I don't necessarily want to know if you disclosed that or not, but I think that they were smart in renaming it. And I think at first we're kind of like, oh, that's a bad name. But I'm like, you know what? It doesn't have risk in the name, which helps us as analysts keep things straight in our heads, which I appreciate. And I think the market has the same reaction now.
Yeah, if you look at the kind of the core vendors in what I would consider the real threat and vulnerability management space, and I'm not going to include Tenable here because I really don't think they have a product yet.
Sure.
But you've got Kenna Security. I think really is the de facto leader in the space. I mean, they've been around the longest. You know, I knew Ed Bellis when he was a customer of mine at Qualys, right? I mean, he was at Orbitz and then, you know, did the whole thing with Risk.io. You have Bay Dynamics.
Kenna's
call their
got
product Risk Fabric. So there's that risk thing again.
Kenna's got $43.5 million in funding, recently taking a Series C, according to Owler. So
yeah, Bay Dynamics with their Risk Fabric product. You have NopSec that also is in the space, and then the last one is RiskSense, which you and I know because we've had some discussions with Shri over the years as well. So those are kind of the main four. And they all, to me, they're all, the base is similar. There's differentiation between them in parts here. You have, all of them are taking device vulnerability data from the three big major players, adding threat correlation and adding asset criticality to do scoring. And that's what drives prioritization. So they're all pretty much doing that across the board. Then it varies from there, right? RiskSense is kind of more focused on validating the exploits are there as part of proof that the exploit exists.
NopSec has recently built some of that capability in as well. I did a briefing. Actually, Adrian Santabria, who many of our listeners know has been on our shows before, actually works for NopSec. So I got an opportunity, it was like a month or more ago to catch up with Adrian, and I don't have my notes in front of me. I probably should have, but I know one of the things he did say was they do some validation as well.
Yeah, they also do a couple other things, which I'll get into in a second. Bay Dynamics also has a user entity behavior component that ties in. So they've got this like UEBA capability along with their Risk Fabric.
Yep.
And then you have NopSec and Kenna. And Kenna created an application risk application risk module recently, so that they're starting to expand beyond device vulnerabilities and starting to look at the application vulnerabilities. That's a growing space. Listeners who've heard me say this before, it's all about application, user, and data. And so you're seeing, application risk specific vulnerabilities now coming into play. So Kenna created a module there. NopSec also has one for web applications, and they've also created one for security configurations. So if we think about what the VM vendors have done over the years, right? Yeah, device vulnerability management, got it. Then they moved to application vulnerabilities with the web app scanner, the app spider, even what Tenable was doing with WAS. So now you see both NopSec and Kenna saying, hey, we need bring that application data in because customers are going to ask for it.
Well, and also, Matt, early on too, Rapid7 especially, like really early on when they acquired the Metasploit project, they very quickly built in to their scanner the ability to validate those vulnerabilities with an exploit framework. They were probably one of the first ones to do that.
Yeah, and that was kind of really the way they went to market after the Metasploit acquisition was kind of validating the vulnerability with Metasploit, right? And so that was kind of their differentiation in the core VM space.
Sure. And
but NopSec added a configuration capability. So if you think about Qualys policy compliance or some of the other configuration management tools, NopSec actually is doing some stuff on the configuration side as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, there's a lot of and so I think the way that when I was at Tenable, it might have even been before you got at Tenable, the way we dealt with the exploit thing was we at Tenable had integrated with other exploit databases and frameworks and can tell you, hey, we found this vulnerability. Here's all the places where we believe there to be some type of exploit as well. And of course, there's a lot of debate as to how exploitability plays into the prioritization the remediation of that vulnerability. I think it is one factor. I think earlier on, like maybe 10 years ago, it got way too much weight. I think that's kind of settled out in the market as teams are bringing forth these requirements where they're like, all right, fine, if there's an exploit, but more importantly, which systems is this vulnerability on? How critical are those systems to the business? Do they house any sensitive data? And also, what are some of my other compensating controls that could impact my severity to this vulnerability? Are all factors that I have organizations take into effect, some of which have built their own software, Matt, quite frankly, to accomplish this, because I believe that the market has matured greatly in the past even 5 years, where a lot of organizations are probably moving away from that, although some of them have built really awesome software, and sometimes my recommendation is to stick with that for now.
Yeah, the financials were really good at building out some of these systems on their own. Richard Sierson, who was at Kaiser years ago, was building his own kind of analytics platform to do this himself. Yep. But you're right, the products have matured and you're seeing more adoption at the enterprise of these types of solutions. But you bring up an interesting point that only gets a little more complex, is the interdependency of these systems now. And this is where cloud and application and containers and all of this like new technology really starts to create some very interesting, what do I do with it questions. So for example, in the old days, right, it was easy. I had a device running in my data center, had some vulnerabilities. I run a scanner. I understand the criticality, understand the threat vectors, done. Well, now that host is running in cloud and on-prem. Oh, and that device happens to be running my Kubernetes cluster, which happens to be running a bunch of my containers for my new application. So what's starting to happen now is you start to look at some of these vendors, is they're starting to think about the impact of cloud infrastructure, the impact of containers and container-based applications, because they create additional complexities that have to be accounted for when you think about, well, what's the risk of that device? Was that device running my public-facing web application in AWS? And if it is, maybe that has higher priority than a server that's running my test servers, or all these factors now come into play. And that's where I think some things start to get a little interesting, as you start to look at, well, who are these new vendors that I should be looking at? What data do they have? How does that data integrate into some of these existing threat and vulnerability management solutions?
Yes, absolutely. And I think when we look at containers and even cloud, the whole chain, like the value chain, I guess you could call it, right? I think you can call it that, is understanding those individual components and then doing the threat model to come up with your severity is. So when you mentioned Kubernetes, I'm like, well, that's real. Like if there are vulnerabilities in that, and Kubernetes is what's controlling my dev, QA, and production for my application that runs my business, the security vulnerabilities on that Kubernetes system or container or whatever is housing your Kubernetes, if it's in the cloud, maybe it's hosted, right? That's very critical, because if someone gains control of that, they could probably pretty stealthily start to make changes and put evil, bad things in all of your applications, and you're going to have a hell of a time doing instant response on that. And I think there's a lot of examples in that in my source code control system, in my configuration management for my cloud and container providers. You know, all of these different components we have now have to be put into that model that I spoke about earlier, which, as Matt says, was pretty easy when we had all our servers, in our data center, and now we don't. So we have to think about what the impact is to the organization on all these pieces.
Yeah, and that's where I'm seeing some of the interesting potential integration points, right? Yeah. You now have a whole new set of startup vendors focused on things like, software composition analysis, Black Duck, Sonatype,
Yep.
White Source.
Yep.
You have static container analysis companies, Twistlock, Aqua, Layered Insight.
Now, do you put Sysdig in there too?
Tenable, right?
Matt, do you put Sysdig in the container security space?
I do now.
Okay.
Originally, they were really focused on container monitoring.
Yeah, that's what a
But
sense
with
I got.
Sysdig Secure, they're definitely in the core security,
Okay.
container security space now.
Yeah. They're on, and we'll report this on the show, actually, now that I have really easy access to this data, is companies that just got funding. So Sysdig is like number 13 on my list, having just gotten funding on September 12th. I'm unsure of the rounds and stuff. I don't think that's important right now, but that's why I bring them up in that context, because they were kind of new to me, and I'm like, I haven't seen them playing in security, but I think they just got a pretty substantial Series A or B funding round. So
yeah, they did an open source kernel plugin. Really, originally, a lot of people were using to do container monitoring, and I talked to Apurva More at Black Hat, and their vision from day one was really to go after the security side. They started more on the monitoring side, then built Sysdig Secure. You're going to see them in the container security space for sure. And then you've got the cloud workload protection platforms that are trying to manage all the infrastructure, right? So Capsulate and LSeed and Cloud Passage, Threat Stack. Threat Stack just had an announcement, I think yesterday, about their new containerized agent, for example, right? So you're going to continue to see those players around where they're collecting different vulnerabilities at different layers, maybe misconfiguration at different layers. Even the cloud providers themselves. Think about AWS and Inspector, the ability to do vulnerability scanning on the EC2 instances, or Guard Duty, Guard Trail, CloudWatch, CloudTrail. All these different pieces are now all potentially have data that needs to be correlated in as you're thinking about device, application, container, and cloud infrastructure, et cetera. These are all these vendors that are going to be in play.
Would you put API security and monitoring tools in there as well? Because I think that's
ultimately, I think
right?
that's the one that's furthest behind a little bit right now. I mean, yes, it's important, but right now what I'm seeing is people just focusing on the basic static analysis work. So your traditional software composition and your base static analysis. When you get into the runtime products and monitoring even the APIs at runtime, the containers at runtime, we're not at the same level of maturity there yet. And so I'm not seeing the same type of demand yet for those integrations into some of these solutions.
Sure.
But I think over time, yes, we'll see them.
So there's a company called Salt Security that I've actually scheduled a briefing with. I wanted to thank them. They were actually, I mentioned them on the show because they were really nice to me. I mean, it was pretty much a cold email that I sent them because I saw that they got funding. And then I read what they did, which is Salt API Threat Protection Solution discovers APIs, detects vulnerabilities, and provides prioritized insights to eliminate risk, which is exactly what we're talking about today, Matt. And they were very nice, and I've got some time scheduled coming up, I believe, with their founder and CEO, so I'll be able to get more information about what they do. So thank you for being not everyone. It's a scale, Matt, when I reach out to some of these companies, and it's a forest to wade through, but they were super awesome. So.
Yeah, and so these are the types of solutions we're going to continue to see pop up, solving specific problems, but they have to be correlated back to the overall risk discussion. And if the TVM vendors are going to continue to move up what I call that risk value chain, then integration with some of these other sources are going to be important so they can start to put all the pieces together, because it's not just a standalone server anymore. The interdependencies of these different technologies and these different sources of data will influence prioritization and risk calculations in the future.
Absolutely. Oh, I wanted to get your take, Matt. And I've heard, and I guess we have to channel John Strand here, right? So what I'm hearing in the market about ServiceNow is really good in the IT operations front. I don't think there's many that will disagree. However, I mean, when you get to a software company of that size, Matt, and the complexity, there's always issues with people's implementations. So you'll start hearing people go, yeah, I have like these issues and struggles with it, and other people saying it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. That just could be the size of the implementation teams and the comprehension, they have, or the internal processes and structures just not being in place. Then you're trying to go implement software when you haven't built a good foundation of process and policy. And now, like last year, I think we started seeing this year, ServiceNow did a program with us. Last year is, I think, when they started messaging into security and having products that help with this problem. And now when they segue into this area of threat and vulnerability analysis, I hear mixed reviews. However, when I dig into ServiceNow and I meet with them and speak with them, and the customers that like it, like I'm with it, dude. I'm like, if ServiceNow is going to hold all of my assets and all of the people who are accessing my assets and who owns those assets, and then they're going to be able to take in vulnerability data, blend all that together. If you've already got ServiceNow, my thinking is it's a great solution to manage your threats and vulnerabilities and prioritize and utilize their ticketing system to have that workflow and remediation, and they've got a SOAR product built in now. I think that's perfect. But again, I sort of mixed reviews.
Yeah, remember, there's three components here. There's the asset criticality, which I think they have as
yes, they do.
Kind of that asset inventory.
Absolutely.
You've got the vulnerability data, which really is still coming from
absolutely.
the Qualys's, Tenables, and Rapid7s of the world. And Tenable actually made an announcement, I think a week or two ago, with ServiceNow to actually improve that integration.
Oh, good.
And so if you get that vulnerability data from those three sources, and then you bring in the third component, which is kind of that threat intelligence, threat feed, then yes, right? So probably what you're hearing is, I think ServiceNow has the core asset data. They've had it for a long time as part of their ITSM. I think it gives them a really, really good foundation. The question now is, how good is the vulnerability integration? How good is the threat integration? And is that driving the same level of prioritization or not? And whether they build it, partner, buy, over time, I think that will continue to, we'll see how that plays out. But I think that's part of the challenge for them is they're not the core source necessarily for the vulnerability data and or the threat data. And so does that limit the effectiveness of the solution, at least today?
Right. Yeah, because some vendors are integrating with ServiceNow just to take advantage of some of those components and going, well, we can do the threat and the vulnerability stuff, and we'll just feed like less into ServiceNow. I think organizations that are kind of all in with ServiceNow are probably going to use mostly the ServiceNow native solutions and add-ons to accomplish some of these things and probably get more mileage out of it. I think it's like a lot of solutions, Matt. Sometimes it's just different strokes for different folks, depending on where they are in their maturity, depending on how they've divided their resources in IT, also really plays into the best solution for you.
Yeah, and where's the focus long-term for ServiceNow, right? Are they going to continue to go down an IT ops path? Are they going to continue to invest in the security side of this? Sometimes it's strategic prioritization of where the resources are, of what they can and can't accomplish.
Right. Alrighty. The interesting Owler is not very accurate as to who the competitors are to Kenna, RiskSense, NopSec, and are in there. Some other ones, ThreadFix is in there. I don't think that necessarily makes sense, or I've heard of that.
Dynamic should be on there. I don't think it's there. I think Tenable's listed too somewhere.
It is.
On
Tenable
that
and
list.
Qualys are listed there as well.
Yeah. Tenable's really not there yet. I know they want to get there, but I haven't seen,
I think
that
they all do.
Product. Qualys has Threat Protect. Threat Protect's the closest thing that I've seen from Qualys and from the traditional VM players.
What do you?
We'll talk about Rapid7 later in the news.
Sure.
They finally got the Insight Connect.
Happy for them on that. So, the organizations that have built it themselves, Matt, do you think that the trend is going to be they maintain their software, or do you think the market is catching up to that challenge and problem, and they're going to be ripping and replacing their internal software? The biggest complaint I hear is it takes up a lot of resources, and it's software they have to maintain. Also, the maintenance and development consumes resources.
Yeah, I think it's going to depend a little bit. Some of the companies that have built their software have probably already written it off internally. And as long as they maintain the resources internally, they can probably continue to support it and enhance it. Like I said, Kaiser was building a big system. I don't know if they still use it or not, honestly. ADP was building their own system on a lot of the work that Roland Cloutier brought over from RSA. So there were organizations that were building it. Whether they're still supporting it or not, I'm not quite sure. I guess it depends on whether you still have the resources to support it. But it's potentially fully capitalized. So if it's working and it's got everything in it that you need, then I think it would be hard to justify buying a commercial solution at this point. So I think it will depend.
Yeah, and if they designed it with a solid architecture and foundation, adapting it to integrate with other changing products in the environment should be pretty easy. If they didn't write the code such that they're kind of pigeonholed into, like, we use Jira for tickets, and then all of a sudden they're like, well, now we're not. We're using something else, or probably in the reverse, because Jira is a really good ticketing system, right?
I think the hardest piece in this model is actually the asset model.
Yeah,
because I think it's the asset side of this has changed the most.
Yep.
And how you understand the relationship of assets. I think that's the hardest part. Something we had to solve back when I built Control Path, the ability to model any asset and any asset relationship. You have to think at that level, because now I have a container and a software library and an orchestrator and a this and a that. How do those all fit into an asset model? So if it was designed very host and vulnerability based, not thinking about these other things, it might be harder actually.
Cool. All righty. That's a really good summary of this space and problem, and kind of an update on where things are going in the space, which is nice. So with that, we'll take a short break, and we're going to come back, talk about the enterprise security news. A lot of good stories this week. Stay tuned.